Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome again to another podcast on Talk Architecture. The title of today's podcast is The Compass versus the Chart. The compass was mentioned in a newspaper article that quoted the Vice Chancellor of a famous university, and which happened to have architecture as one of the courses. In here, we have the quotation in the article says that the Vice Chancellor wants to be clear. Rankings are not the goal, they are a means. The goal is and has always been to create knowledge and graduates that make the world a better place. If climbing the rankings comes as a result of doing that goal well, then we should welcome it. We must remember that our true rank is measured by the positive difference we make for humanity and the world, and as a compass of good, and that alone remains the most noble of all. This is why we're doing an episode, The Compass versus the Chart. And we're adding in, can architecture education stay noble in the world of rankings? This is a specific take on that particular article and that particular quote I just mentioned. So I would like to go into an introduction where when the Vice Chancellor recently said rankings are not the goal, they are the means, and when he called for a compass of good, a true rank measured by the positive difference we make for humanity. But in the world of architecture, education, are we actually following that compass or are we just chasing the chart? When we prioritize global prestige, do we lose the local soul of the design studio? Does the pressure to climb the leaderboards force us to favor award-winning visuals over the slow and glamorous work of building for real communities? Today, we're picking apart those metrics. We're asking if the pursuit of a top 100 spot is actually flattening the way we teach, the way we design, and the way we define a successful graduate. Hence, this topic today, the compass versus the chart. So, this is a monologue or a solo commentary on 4 distinct movements that I like to go into, from the big idea surrounding the VC's quote to the ground reality, the architecture studio, with a call to action in the end. So we talk about the introduction that we said just now. In a provocative way, we have introduced the Vice Chancellor's statement. And it is really a corporate academic world. And it is really an intellectual honesty in which the Vice Chancellor wished to push forward. However, we like to ask the question here. If the Vice Chancellor says rankings are just a means, why does it feel like the ends? The actual teaching are being bent to fit the metrics. And the very evidence of this is the top management suggesting to the architecture school of not having the key performance indicators 30% for teaching to be 0%, which means that teaching is being bent to fit the metrics. A research university in which the vice chancellor is the leader, and all the courses in it, such as the professional courses, such as architecture, suffers from this chase to go up the charts. Where does the compass lead us? What does it point to? So, thinking that this is really the rankings being the ends to everything, and how architecture course is being made to bend towards that ends, and such discussion on teaching architecture to be simplified to getting the student, for example, in the design thesis course, to come up with so much research and to come up with the research gaps. Have you seen the pre-thesis report now? It is like a research framework. It is not identifying design problems as it should be, when the topic of design is perhaps a library, a community center, an art gallery, a museum, a sports center, a wet market. Just say topics that I've encountered before. A hotel, a budget hotel, a school, a secondary school, primary school. So we have those specific type of building, and we have a whole pre-thesis of coming up with the research framework, identifying research gaps. This is architecture. This is not research, dissertation or research that is not focused on architecture. Research need to help with the study on the topic, but research is not the goal. Research is just a means. You see that research, in the end of the day, is meant for publication. It's meant to be writing something and being published in a general book. I've been there before. I know what I'm talking about. I've seen it before. Where the project, the architectural design project, is being enmeshed with the research component, somehow trying to get publications out of this. Because for the academic, because this is asked upon them to do so, for the academic with 0% teaching, it's basically doing a research project. If 30% turns into to do with publication or writing or research from 70% to 100%, and absorbing design thesis into that research agenda, what is it? What do you want? Do you want an article out of this, not a design project? So this is a question we're asking. If the vice chancellor says rankings are just a means, why does it feel like the ends, the actual teaching, is being bent to fit the metrics? I'm repeating this, I know, but I'm trying to remind the points. Now we go to the second, in the next 10 minutes or so, or less. We're going to the second segment, which is the architecture translation. We talked about the provocation just now. Now we're going to translate this. The metric versus the reality, pick on the data points. The metric versus the reality. For example, rankings love research citations. So the research that students do, they are for research citations at the end of the day, for publication. But in architecture, the most profound knowledge is often found in built work or community workshops, not just in peer-reviewed journals. So when it was mentioned that the compass of good, talk about the VC's metaphor. In architecture, a compass of good means designing for social equity, climate resilience, and local contexts. Design, not merely doing a research framework. The whole act of designing or finding research problems is what architecture design studio is about. The conflict here, when we talk about what's happening, is that one would argue that a school chasing a global rank might prioritize, quote, high-tech internationalism, unquote, which looks good on paper, over, quote, contextual vernacular, unquote, which solves local problems but is harder to quantify. Now, I've seen this before, high-tech internationalism. I mean, it's like ubiquitous, the drawings, how often it is, in a way, parametric or curved, and with a certain amount of, shall we say, vegetation. And this reflects on perhaps a research on how sustainability would be the main concept of this. And it's ubiquitous. When I say ubiquitous, you can find this anywhere, really. You would have an architecture that is multi-story. At the end of the day, the narrative is important. The conceptual framework becomes important, but not the design problem, not the numerous design problem that they have to tackle from detailed design to macro. So when you say the priority is high-tech internationalism over contextual vernacular, you're looking at more context-driven projects, site-specific problems, or site-specific contextual problems. Solving a local problem. We're not saying like Kelantan or Kota Baru is the same as Petaling Jaya. They're two different contexts. Demographics, how it is, the environment, the topography, everything, from the climate to the people to the culture. So when you talk about local problems, you need to identify, define them, and seek out to solve the problem as best you can with an architecture that fits a form or a solution that solves the design problem of that context. So when we talk about contextual vernacular, solves local problems that's harder to quantify. So this is not in the interests of metrics, which prioritize quantitative research data. Now I'm going into the next one here. The third section on the cost of the climb up the metrics. When we talk about studio culture, we will discuss how the pressure for reputation, your top ranking architecture or university in Asia or in in ASEAN. And how does that affect the student? Does the studio become a factory for competition ready? Because you need to be really competitive. Or your agenda for the studio curriculum is to do with priming the students to come up with competition ready solution. A factory, creating a factory of doing competition ready, which render rather than a laboratory of ethical failure and experimentation. It's more to do with experimentation, and there are a lot of failures, and the students will struggle because they need to define the design problem as they go along. So when you have in your mind the students with the renders, providing already something that you can submit for competition earlier on, you forego the design problems and experimentation. You get what I mean? That's what sort of studio culture do you want to happen? What are things that how you guide the students? What do you say every week or every 2 days in a week? There is a difference between saying, where are those set of drawings? Have you got your plans yet? Have you got your sections yet? That's that asking for those products or asking for the set of drawings is not really doing coaching the student to be better architects. It's just you reminding them that you are not up to schedule. But by right, the students still struggle with design problems by the local context or site-specific problems and identifying and trying to see what is needed in their work in order to solve those problems, to get a good fit. So that is sitting down with them, asking them those questions like, how can I help you? What seems to be the problem? What is it that you're struggling with? Rather than asking, where are the drawings? You see the difference between a factory approach and a laboratory or experimental approach. The difference between between the agenda of competition ready rather than experimentation. So we come to another point in the cost of the climb. The cost of the climb that I mentioned here is the studio culture being a factory. Number two is the faculty burnout. You point out that when professors are forced to publish or perish, that's famous phrase, publish or perish, to boost the rankings, their availability for the grueling one-to-one mentorship required in architecture design diminish. This was mentioned before, the feedback, the looking and supervising the students' work, the students' drawings, whether, it is architecture, by the way. You are building a building and you're building other things. You're creating space. So you're trying to solve a lot of design problem based on the topic or the typology or type of building. So you need to sit down, and it's grueling to say the least with the one-to-one, one-on-one mentorship. And that is one of the costs of the climb, the faculty burnout for the teaching staff. So for the third one under this, the costs of the climb also have a flattening effect. When we argue that global rankings create a standardized architect, stripping away the unique regional identities that make architecture a rich, diverse field. Yes, we can see the argument here that the particularities or identities became flattened, and it's the same all over. From one drawing to another set of drawings, I mean, different authors, they kind of look the same. So we need to encourage individuals to, shall we say, find their way and discover themselves. Now, finally, the last part of this podcast, I like to focus on the alternative of the true rank. What is really a true rank? To define the success, we need to challenge the listener to define a top-tier architecture school not by its QS score, but by its alumni's impact. Take a top-tier architecture school from the rankings, and yes, the alumni that came out of that school, what is their impact in the architecture fraternity? That could define how top tier that school is. The alumni could be those who as well, we have to do a ranking for the alumni in terms of what have they achieved. Their CVs would help. And you can see the diversity in the CVs, or how some of the alumni became architects of note, leading projects that are worthy, or shall we say, popular in the sense that people appreciate those projects. There's a lot of reviews out there. We can try to find a measure from the alumni's impact, for example, rather than QS score. Then you can see the true ranking of the School of Architecture. So we would like to put out an argument to the Vice Chancellor's point. Our true rank is measured by the positive difference that we make for humanity. And if a degree makes you a better servant to your community, you've graduated from the best school in the world, regardless of whether it sits on the QS ranking list. So here we are trading the studio crit for the citation hit. Shore up teaching percentage of the KPIs. Shore it up from 30% to 60% again. Make it the majority of what the work that necessitate a good School of Architecture will be. Reflect in the work that's necessary to get students to speed in their work, and for them to be more confident going into the industry. Nothing about those problems that we have been talking about earlier. Students not getting work, students feeling that they did well, they did right, but they couldn't get any job because the employers reject their work and saying that it's not good enough. We need to get back on the upper hand with this. We can't afford to see students struggle because the system failed them. So architecture is a local act. Rankings are a global game. Are we building architects, or are we building a brand? Meaning, too much of this architecture education is absorbed into the agenda of creating the universities to be of higher ranking, and the academic suffering and having to follow that, and making architecture projects into research frameworks and reports and articles. So we are trying to suit a brand, and the brand is we are the top architecture school, but not really, because you have not been reviewed by other architects or your peers. You're being reviewed by your university rankings, and other courses such as medicine and engineering, for example, are the ones that make the ranking higher, not architecture school. So with that, I'd like to conclude this topic that we propose to counter the Vice Chancellor's comments in the article earlier, with this topic of excuse me, the topic of rankings lacking a moral compass is one of the things that's problematic, you know. So it's kind of sad. Yeah. The compass and the chart. Can architecture education stay noble in a world of rankings? That's the topic for today. Thank you for listening.